She thought she was meeting someone new, just another online date. But what should have been fun and exciting ended in unthinkable tragedy. This is the heartbreaking case of Sydney Loofe. Her story began with what seemed like a routine Tinder match. On the 11th of November 2017, she connected with Audrey Kane, 23, a woman who had a striking and seemingly friendly profile. Audrey had shared a fun and flirty conversation with Sydney. After some exchanges, both women decided to set up their first date. On November 13, the night before their planned date, Audrey messaged Sydney on Tinder with a proposal.
Maybe meet first somewhere in Lincoln, cruise, and smoke some weed. Get to know each other a little bit. Then I'll take you on a date to Riva Steak and Seafood at Ameristar and pay for as much gambling as you want to do.
Sydney responded with a lighthearted tone.
Haha, okay, I'm down to cruise and smoke first. I haven't smoked in 6 days.
She added that she'd been trying to quit, but didn't want to miss the chance to smoke with what she called a gorgeous girl, even offering to pay for the weed herself. But Audrey replied with confidence,
I have plenty of money, dear, and plenty of weed, LOL. I can give you some Balmash.
The two agreed to meet the next day, on November 14. Sydney, perhaps a little cautious, asked,
Just going to be me and you, right?
Okay. Yes, of course.
Audrey reassured her. At one point, Audrey asked for Sydney's address, saying she needed it to see how long the drive would take. Sydney had planned to wait. She didn't want to give out her address until the day of the date. But after some back and forth, she eventually gave in and sent it early, despite her better judgment. It would prove to be a fatal mistake. On their first date, Audrey picked up Sydney, and they drove around talking and smoked weed. The date went so well, they decided to go out again the next day, cruising and smoking. A little bit about Sydney Loofe. Sydney Irene Loofe was born on August 21, 1993, in Broken Bow, Nebraska. She spent her early childhood in Arcadia, where she was raised by her parents, George and Susie Loofe. Around 2000, the family relocated to the small town of Nellie. Sydney was known for her love of fishing and sports. She played both basketball and golf throughout her school years. But during her teenage years, she developed scoliosis, a condition that eventually limited her ability to participate in athletics. After graduating from high school, Sydney enrolled at Northeast Community College. However, she eventually decided to leave school and enter the workforce. She took a job at a Menards hardware store in Lincoln, Nebraska, and had recently moved into a place of her own. Like many young people her age, she turned to online dating in search of companionship. Sydney also struggled with bouts of depression. The weekend before her disappearance, she visited her parents in Nellie. Her mother, Susie, had grown increasingly concerned. Sydney's medication didn't seem to be helping. Wanting to support her daughter, Susie returned to Lincoln with her on Monday, November 13, and helped arrange an appointment with her cousin, a general practitioner in the city. That day, Sydney was prescribed new medication. Before Susie headed back home to Nellie, the two shared a meal together. Over the next couple of days, they stayed in close contact. Sydney sounded more upbeat and optimistic, hopeful signs that the new medication might be helping. While visiting her parents in Nellie, Sydney had met up with her childhood friend, Brittany Flynn. The two had remained very close over the years. On November 14, Sydney texted Brittany, excited about how well her first date with a woman named Audrey had gone. She even shared a picture of her date and said she was looking forward to seeing her again the following evening. On November 15, Sydney went to work as usual. Later that evening, Audrey picked her up from her apartment, just as she had the night before. Before leaving for her second date, Sydney posted a message on Snapchat that read, "Ready for my date." Her mom, Susie, saw the post and texted her, "You didn't tell me you had a date." But Sydney never responded. At first, Susie wasn't overly concerned until the evening of November 16. That's when Sydney's sister, Mackenzie, began receiving messages from Sydney's friends. She hadn't shown up for work, and none of their calls or texts were being answered. Both Susie and Mackenzie tried reaching out, but there was still no response. That's when they knew something was wrong. They contacted the Lincoln Police Department and officially reported Sydney missing. Susie requested they do a welfare check since they were not in Lincoln. Alarmed that Sydney hadn't shown up to work on November 16 and wasn't responding to any calls or messages, something completely out of character, her family and friends began working tirelessly to piece together anything that might help find her. The leading theory was that Sydney hadn't been seen since leaving for her second date with Audrey, and something had clearly gone wrong. Desperate for answers, Sydney's former coworker and best friend, Brooklyn McChrystal, decided to take matters into her own hands. They needed to find Audrey. That evening, McChrystal created a fake Tinder account, replicating Sydney's settings in a desperate attempt to find the same woman from the photo Sydney had shared. Eventually, she came across a familiar face, Audrey Kane, and swiped right. At the same time, officers from the Lincoln Police Department carried out a welfare check at Sydney's apartment. They entered through an unlocked window and found the lights still on, but no trace of Sydney. Before leaving, they turned the lights off, hoping passing patrols might notice if someone returned. The next day, November 17, Audrey responded to McChrystal's message. After some casual back and forth, McChrystal managed to get a phone number. She wasted no time. She handed it over to police immediately. With still no sign of Sydney, her parents and sister Mackenzie went to her apartment themselves. Her car was still in the driveway. Inside, her beloved cat, Mimsy, had been left without food or water for nearly 2 days, a chilling sign that Sydney had never come home. With the phone number provided by McChrystal, Lincoln Police investigator Lacey Rhea made a breakthrough. She traced the number and cross-referenced it with hotel records, revealing that Audrey was actually a woman named Bailey Boswell. Boswell had checked into a Lincoln hotel on November 14, the same day as her first date with Sydney. Lincoln Police investigator Cameron Cleland had worked plenty of missing persons cases before, but something about this one felt different. He got involved on November 17, 2017, just days after Sydney Loofe vanished. What struck him right away was the urgency from Sydney's family. They were adamant something was wrong, Cleland recalled. They reported her missing immediately. They weren't waiting. Following protocol, Cleland checked Sydney's bank records. There hadn't been any activity in 2 days. That's when an officer passed along a lead, a phone number obtained by Brooklyn McChrystal for the woman Sydney was supposed to meet, a woman who went by the name Audrey. Cleland left a voicemail for Audrey. A few hours later, she called back. Audrey admitted she had met Sydney through a dating app. She said she picked Sydney up at 7 p.m. on November 15. They drove around, smoked weed, listened to music. According to her, she dropped Sydney off at a friend's place later that night. She gave the name Audrey Kane, but got cagey when pressed for details, worried, she claimed, about getting in trouble for controlled substances. I felt like she was holding something back, Cleland said. 2 days later, on November 19, another strange detail surfaced. A man named Aubrey Trail called the Lincoln Police Department, but asked for the wrong officer. When Cleland checked the message, he heard Trail say that police were looking for his fiancée, Bailey Boswell, because she'd been the last person seen with Sydney Loofe. Further investigation into phone records revealed that both Sydney's and Boswell's phones had traveled together to the small town of Wilbur on the evening of November 15. Using law enforcement databases, Investigator Riha was able to pinpoint the last location where their phones had pinged, an address in Wilbur that would soon become the center of a disturbing and heartbreaking case. Sidney Loofe's phone had shut off at 8:32 p.m. that night. After tracing the final signal from Sidney's phone, investigators identified a duplex in Wilbur, Nebraska, as the last known location. The basement unit of that property was rented by Bailey Boswell and her partner, Aubrey Trail. Initially, officers conducted a welfare check, knocking on the door, but no one answered. Using a key from the landlord, they entered the apartment. There was no sign of Sidney, but something immediately stood out, the overwhelming smell of bleach lingering in the air. The following day, police returned with a search warrant. They examined the space more thoroughly, but nothing seemed visibly out of place. Still, investigators couldn't shake the sense that something was very wrong. The owner of the duplex, who lived in the unit upstairs, recalled a few troubling details. A strong chemical odor, bleach, had been seeping through the floorboards. Even more unsettling, the air conditioner was blasting at full power, despite the freezing November temperatures. Concerned, the landlord went downstairs to check. He knocked on the basement door, but there was no answer. Left with no choice, he let himself in to switch off the AC unit, which was located near the stairs. He later shared all of this with the investigating officers. What he didn't realize at the time was that this strange scene was just the surface of something far more sinister. During the investigation, authorities uncovered a chilling timeline that pointed to premeditation. Within minutes of Sidney Loofe sharing her address on Tinder ahead of their first date on November 14, Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail booked a room at a Best Western hotel in Lincoln, just minutes from the Menards where Sidney worked. Using surveillance footage and cell phone data, investigators began piecing together the extent of the couple's planning. On the afternoon of November 14, at 4 p.m., Boswell and Trail were recorded checking into the hotel. The following morning, November 15, they were seen shopping at Aardvark Antique Mall, where they purchased a folding saw, a weeder, and food grinders. Phone records later revealed both of their devices, pinging near Sidney's apartment just before she left for work, strongly suggesting they had been watching her. Around 11:30 a.m., Loofe left for her shift at Menards. Surveillance footage captured the suspects in the store's parking lot, and Trail was even seen inside the store just before Loofe exited, glancing over his shoulder at her. While Sidney was working, the pair purchased disturbing items from multiple stores. At Home Depot, they bought a foot-long hacksaw, wire snips, plastic drop cloths, and a utility knife with backup blades. Trail also bought cotton cord, Drano, air freshener, lighters, a thermometer, and protein bars from Menards. Later, the couple was recorded purchasing a tree saw, 30-gallon trash bags, and gallons of Clorox bleach. Just hours before Sidney's second date with Boswell, they picked up hefty plastic bags and Clorox from a Dollar General. The following day, after Sidney was already missing, they bought more of the same items at a grocery store in Wilbur. That afternoon, November 15, Boswell sent Loofe a message asking how her day was going. At nearly the same time, phone records and surveillance footage placed Boswell and Trail in the Menards parking lot, watching from a distance while Loofe remained unaware of their presence. Every transaction, every surveillance image painted a clear picture. This was not a spontaneous act. It was planned. The purchases made by both Boswell and Trail painted a grim picture. Investigators believed the drop cloth they bought was used to cover the kitchen floor and nearby surfaces, where the tools would later come into play. The way they prepared and cleaned up the scene suggested a disturbing level of planning, almost as if, in my opinion, this wasn't their first time. Bailey Boswell didn't always seem destined to become part of a gruesome case that would shock the nation. Born in 1994, and raised in Leon, Iowa, a small town with fewer than 2,000 people. Bailey was a former high school athlete, remembered by classmates as fun-loving, sociable, and even popular. But, like many small-town stories that take a dark turn, her life began to unravel after high school. She reportedly struggled with drug use and financial instability, eventually leaving Iowa in search of a fresh start. In Nebraska, Bailey became estranged from parts of her family and fell in with a much older man, 51-year-old Aubrey Trail. A relationship that would lead her deeper into a world of manipulation, crime, and eventually murder. Trail, more than 20 years her senior, was a drifter and convicted felon originally from Mississippi. His criminal history spanned multiple states and included armed robbery, fraud, and a string of elaborate cons. He claimed to run a rare coin and antique business, but most of it was smoke and mirrors. Charismatic and domineering, Trail cultivated a disturbing persona, sometimes calling himself a vampire or the leader of a secret society governed by cult-like rules. He lured vulnerable young women into his orbit, offering promises of luxury and protection in exchange for complete obedience. Born in 1966, Aubrey Trail's troubled past stretched back to early childhood. Reports suggest he was abused by his parents and later his stepfather, leading his grandfather to temporarily assume custody. But the cycle of abuse resumed when Trail returned home. Raised in poverty, he bounced between foster homes and juvenile facilities, eventually landing in prison as a teenager for armed robbery. The trauma and instability of his early years may have played a role in shaping the manipulative and violent behavior he exhibited as an adult. By the time Bailey met Trail, he had already begun cultivating a disturbing dynamic with several young women, requiring them to call him daddy, obey strict rules, and take part in what witnesses would later describe as ritualistic acts. Once Bailey, then in her early 20s, entered the picture, the behavior escalated. Together, the pair deepened this twisted system of control, luring in more women and blurring the lines between manipulation, fantasy, and violence. Together, Trail and Boswell used online platforms like Tinder to recruit women. In Sydney Loofe's case, Bailey posed as Audrey on the app, luring the unsuspecting 24-year-old into a fatal encounter in 2017. By that point, Bailey was fully enmeshed in Trail's twisted world, one that would ultimately lead both of them to stand trial for a crime that horrified the nation. With the net closing in, Boswell and Trail went on the run. On November 28, police officially named them as persons of interest in Sydney's disappearance. In response, the couple posted a bizarre Facebook livestream, defending themselves and insisting they had nothing to hide. During the video, Boswell claimed that she and Sydney had just driven around smoking weed during their dates, and that she last saw Sydney when she dropped her off at a friend's house after their second meetup. Trail, in the background, could be heard praying that Sydney would be found safe. Just 2 days later, on November 30, the pair were arrested at a motel in Branson, Missouri, though initially on unrelated fraud charges. When taken into custody, they were found with maps, sleeping bags, and hiking gear, suggesting they had been preparing to flee to Mexico. This provided authorities with enough time to gather evidence and build a case against both Boswell and Trail for the murder of Sydney Loofe. Trail, a 51-year-old man with a criminal past, had been known to prey on vulnerable women, especially through online interactions. His extreme and toxic influence over Boswell came to light during the investigation. Trail even referred to himself as a vampire during court proceedings, and he portrayed himself as being part of a cult-like mentality. He believed in the idea of exercising control and wielding power over his victims in horrific ways. Bailey Boswell, originally from a small town in Iowa, had come from a troubled past. As a teenager, she had been in and out of foster care, and despite her seemingly charming online persona, she harbored dark, hidden aspects of herself that would later come to the surface. Her relationship with Aubrey Trail was both dangerous and obsessive. Search teams, led by the FBI and local law enforcement, discovered Sydney Loofe's remains on December 4 and 5. The remains, along with personal items, were found in trash bags along a rural road in Nebraska. A portion of Loofe's upper arm was never recovered. 3 months later, investigators found additional evidence: a bra with slits and the same shirt Sydney had been wearing in her final Snapchat photo. Prosecutors said they had targeted the ditch for a search based on cell phone data, which placed Bailey Boswell's device in that area on November 16. Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were both charged with the murder of Sydney Loofe. At trial, Trail claimed that Sydney Loofe's death resulted from an accidental outcome of rough intercourse. However, the jury rejected his defense, pointing to the clear evidence of premeditation and the cruel actions taken to conceal the murder. 3 women testified under oath that between July and November of 2017, Aubrey Trail and Bailey Boswell engaged in a persistent pattern of psychological manipulation and emotional control. The group they formed, often described as cult-like, was reportedly built through connections made via Boswell's Tinder profile. For the purposes of this video, I will refer to the witnesses by their initials only.
To get your power, you would have to breathe in someone else's last breath. She would smile and giggle, and her eyes would light up almost.
I.H., a former girlfriend of Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail, testified that she once lived with Trail and Boswell in what she later recognized as an emotionally exploitative environment. At the time, she was 20 years old. In the summer of 2017, she met Boswell on Tinder, who was using the alias Jenna, and was introduced to a sugar daddy arrangement that included a weekly allowance of $200 and rigid behavioral expectations. According to A.H., Trail exerted control over a small group of emotionally vulnerable women he referred to as the witches, with Boswell being called the Queen Witch. She said she wasn't allowed to interact with other men and had to ask for permission to do even the simplest things around the house, like getting a glass of water. She testified that she was expected to check in with Trail every 3 hours and refer to him by a specific title. She and Boswell, she claimed, were instructed not to wear clothing inside the home, another method of exerting control. Failure to follow the group's rules, I.H. said, could result in punishment. She described one incident where she was physically restrained and another in which she was struck on the head multiple times. All I could see was stars, she recalled. She recalled an alarming moment when Trail allegedly asked her to consider harming another group member to prove her loyalty. He reportedly claimed such an act would result in supernatural rewards if carried out in a specific way. She said she initially agreed to the plan, but never followed through. At times, they would discuss disturbing fantasies and even encouraged her to share her own thoughts about harming others. She testified that Boswell seemed disturbingly engaged during these conversations, often appearing visibly excited. Her eyes would light up, she said. She even suggested that Boswell seemed emotionally or physically energized by the topics. In one specific instance, she recalled Boswell smiling and laughing as Trail talked about punishing another group member, A.G., who had allegedly broken the group's rules. According to her, Boswell didn't object. Instead, she agreed and dismissed a G as annoying. The plan, A.H. said, involved taking a trip to Pennsylvania under the guise of antiquing and harming a G along the way. At the time, She said she felt mentally prepared for the plan, but didn't understand why she felt that way. Not long after this, in September 2017, she said she left the group. According to A.H., the turning point came while shopping for the planned trip. She was in a fitting room at a TJ Maxx when she suffered a panic attack. She exited the fitting room, approached Boswell, and told her she was done. A.H. said she never met Sydney Loofe and only learned that Trail and Boswell may have been involved in her case when law enforcement later contacted her. During cross-examination by defense attorney Todd Lancaster, A.H. was questioned about her financial relationship with Trail. She estimated receiving at least $1,800 in allowance, along with occasional help paying bills, covering meals, and other expenses. When asked if she ever had her allowance withheld for disobedience, A.H. said no, but that non-compliance often resulted in punishment instead. She described one such incident of physical discipline, where Trail instructed her to kneel and used a belt in a controlling manner. She explained that while the experience was frightening, she never lost consciousness. She said Trail was domineering and persuasive, and she believed most of what he told her. When asked if she thought Trail had used her, Boswell, and a G, she replied, yes. When asked why she never went to the authorities, A.H. explained that she was terrified. I was told if I told anybody, I would be killed. My family would be killed. She confirmed she had not signed any immunity deal with prosecutors and was not testifying in exchange for leniency. A.H. also stated that she never would have considered harming someone without Trail and Boswell's influence, and looking back, she could not understand how she ever agreed to it. A.G., a Russian immigrant who also met Boswell through Tinder, testified in court and supported much of A.H. account. She described how Trail and Boswell frequently spoke about dark and violent fantasies, often referencing occult themes, although she admitted she remained skeptical of their claims. A G said she was 18 and recently out of high school when she matched with a Tinder profile under the name Jenna, who was later revealed to be Boswell. After exchanging messages, Boswell introduced her to Trail and offered a financial arrangement, a so-called sugar daddy relationship. A.G. said she accepted, explaining that at the time, she was trying to save for college and didn't feel comfortable asking her parents for help. In court, A.G. testified that she received a weekly allowance and also sold antiques online and at a local mall. She said her business earned her about $500 a week. Not long after joining the group, A.G. said conversations shifted to topics like witchcraft, with Trail claiming he was a powerful figure and that Boswell was a witch. A.G. testified that she didn't take those claims seriously. However, the tone of the conversations eventually turned darker. A.G. recalled one moment when Trail said that videos involving extreme scenarios could generate large amounts of money online. She said she was disturbed, and when Trail and Boswell noticed her discomfort, they attempted to justify it by saying such actions would only target dangerous individuals. Feeling unsafe, A.G. began distancing herself from the group. She even warned another woman who was getting involved with Trail and Boswell. I told her there was more going on than what she was told, A.G. said. A.G. said she never went to the authorities out of fear. They knew where I lived, where my family was, she testified. Aubrey had said before that he wouldn't hesitate to harm someone if they were in his way. Like A.G., A.H., and Sydney Loofe, KB also matched with Bailey Boswell on Tinder, though at the time, Boswell was using the name Kelsey. KB testified that she first began speaking with Boswell on October 31, 2017. At just 21 years old, she was looking for a serious relationship. It didn't take long for Boswell to introduce the idea of a dominant, submissive dynamic. Boswell would be the dominant. I had never experienced anything like that before, KB said, but it was something I was curious about. Boswell explained there would be specific rules. KB would have to address her as mistress or mommy, follow instructions without hesitation, and comply with strict guidelines when they were alone. The two arranged to meet the very next day, November 1, 2017, at the Ameristar Casino and Hotel. It was there that KB met another key figure in this story, Aubrey Trail. KB was told that Trail was Boswell's master, and if she wanted to be with Boswell, involvement with Trail was expected as well. KB admitted that, despite not being comfortable with Trail, she went along with the situation in order to stay close to Boswell. Over the next several days, from November 1st to November 6th, KB spent time with Boswell and Trail at their home in Wilbur, continuing the relationship under this arrangement. On November 6th, Boswell briefly took KB back to her home in Omaha. However, she became upset after finding a piece of paraphernalia KB had accidentally left in her car and picked her up again the next day. It was then that the atmosphere shifted. KB said she was threatened with punishment for her mistake and endured what she described as physical intimidation at the hands of both Trail and Boswell. From November 7 through November 14, KB stayed with them at the Wilbur apartment. Although she continued her relationship with Boswell, she made it clear that she did not want any involvement with Trail. Still, she remained. During these weeks, KB testified that Trail and Boswell frequently discussed dark and violent fantasies, including disturbing conversations about witches, vampires, and acts of harm. At the time, KB said she believed it was all just part of their fantasy roleplay and didn't take it seriously. Between November 14 and November 16, KB returned to Omaha, communicating with Boswell only by text. Boswell told her they were busy and tired, unable to meet up. What KB didn't know was that during those same dates, prosecutors say Boswell and Trail had met with Sydney Loofe, and that Sydney's tragic fate unfolded in the days that followed. On November 17, Boswell and Trail picked KB up again. They drove to a bank to add funds to KB's credit card, money that would be used to check them into the Ameristar Casino and Hotel once again. That night at the casino, while walking together, Boswell wrapped her arm around KB and told her something chilling KB needed to prove herself by harming a woman Boswell claimed was stalking her. "I was terrified," KB said. "I stayed quiet because this wasn't pretend anymore. This was real." Later that night, Trail also spoke to KB, pressuring her with threats if she didn't cooperate. Fearing for her life and the safety of her family, KB said she agreed, but only because she felt trapped and didn't know how to say no. On November 18, KB said her memory became hazy. She recalled sleeping a lot and remembered a brief trip to a Walmart parking lot where they left Trail's car. On the same date, phone records later showed that Trail and Boswell's devices traveled from Omaha to Nebraska City and back, movements KB didn't seem to recall. Trail then proposed a new plan to KB. They would make money by picking up illegal substances in Grand Island and smuggling them for profit. On November 19, the group checked out of the Ameristar and into the Borders Inn and Suites in Grand Island, again using KB's credit card. But that plan didn't last long. According to KB, Trail quickly shifted gears, proposing something even darker. He suggested they find someone who had stayed behind at the University of Nebraska over Thanksgiving, someone who wouldn't be missed. Trail wanted Boswell and KB to seek out a vulnerable target and finally turn their twisted fantasies into reality. All the disturbing talk. He wanted to watch it come to life. They traveled to the La Quinta Inn in Kearney on November 22. As before, KB checked them in. Shortly after arriving, KB received a voicemail from the Lincoln Police Department. Panic set in. "I thought they had found out what we were doing," KB said. "It felt like someone threw a bucket of cold water over me." Frightened, KB played the voicemail for Trail. He quickly decided they needed to leave Kearney, and they started driving west toward Colorado. During that drive, Trail revealed even more, that Boswell had met someone who was now missing and that they were the last ones seen with her. Realizing the gravity of the situation, they abandoned their original plan and started heading toward Iowa instead. Soon after, KB received another call, this time from the Omaha police. Her mother had reported her missing. When KB called her family back, she learned devastating news. Her father had suffered a heart attack and was gravely ill. That, she said, was her breaking point. KB told Trail and Boswell she needed to go home. They agreed to let her go, but not before Trail purchased KB's car from her. Before parting ways, Boswell broke down in tears. She cried, KB said. "She told me she didn't hurt anyone. She just wanted everything to be settled, and for the missing girl to be found safely." On November 23, KB was dropped off at the casino. From there, she took a cab to the Walmart where Trail's abandoned car was located. Later that day, KB was pulled over while driving that vehicle and was taken into custody for questioning. KB maintained that she had never met Sydney Loofe, nor even heard her name until her arrest. She also noted that during her final week with Trail and Boswell, Boswell frequently broke down in tears and appeared physically ill. These testimonies were pivotal in illustrating the coercive psychological control that Trail and Boswell exerted over the women in their circle. Additionally, a DNA analyst with the Nebraska State Patrol testified that she tested items taken from the Wilbur apartment, including knives, carpet, and pipes. No blood or DNA was found on them. The analyst noted that cleaning products can sometimes interfere with these types of tests. Bailey Boswell's trial began on September 25, 2019. Unlike Trail, she did not argue that Sydney Loofe's death was an accident. Instead, her defense portrayed her as another victim of Trail's manipulation. However, the prosecution contended that Boswell was a willing accomplice who lured Loofe into a trap, fully aware of what would happen. All three witnesses returned to testify against Boswell. They portrayed her not as a victim, but as a dominant figure within the group, an enforcer who demanded obedience and demonstrated cruelty. A.H. testified that Boswell once expressed a desire to kill someone by pouring acid on them. Aubrey Trail gave multiple, often conflicting, confessions throughout the investigation. Initially, he claimed sole responsibility for Sydney Loofe's death, stating from jail that he alone had killed her and invoking the biblical law of retaliation by expressing a desire to be executed for the crime. In a later version, Trail said Loofe had died following a third date with Bailey Boswell on November 16. In yet another account, he alleged that the three of them had planned a sexual encounter involving choking as part of a fantasy, but claimed Loofe died accidentally during the act. He later walked back elements of this story, denying any planned threesome or sexual fantasy, but still insisted that her death was an accident caused by choking. At one point, Trail told the FBI that he made fetish films for clients who paid to see certain kinks acted out, and that he had used their money to pay women like Loofe, knowing the dangers involved in certain acts like choking. Despite the inconsistencies, some parts of Trail's statements proved credible. For instance, he directed investigators to a location where he said he had discarded Loofe's belongings. Acting on his tip, authorities searched Wilbur's Jeck Cemetery and found her phone, driver's license, and credit card exactly where he said they'd be. At the end of June, A visibly frustrated Aubrey Trail erupted in court, angrily declaring Bailey Boswell's innocence, directing curses at both the jury and the court. He then appeared to cut his own neck with a razor blade. Although his injuries were not serious, Trail missed part of the trial afterward because he refused to return to the courtroom. In April 2019, both were found guilty. Aubrey Trail was found guilty of first-degree murder after less than 4 hours of jury deliberation. After another brief deliberation, the jury found Boswell guilty of first-degree murder as well. Aubrey Trail was sentenced to death, while Boswell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case sparked national outrage, drawing attention to the potential dangers of dating apps and the importance of staying vigilant when meeting strangers online. Her mother, Susie Loofe, has since become an advocate for awareness, urging others to be cautious when using dating apps and to always trust their instincts. Her story reminds us that behind every profile is a real person, and sometimes dangerous intentions are hiding behind friendly faces. Our thoughts are with Sydney Loofe's family and friends. May her memory live on. Always put your safety first, no matter who's texting. Imagine meeting someone online who seems perfect, charming, professional, attentive. But what if that person isn't who they claim to be? Today, we explore the terrifying case of Herman Brightman, a man who used dating apps not for love, but as tools to manipulate and harm. Between January 2022 and September 2023, 31-year-old Herman Calvin Brightman of West New York, New Jersey, posed as a nurse or nurse practitioner on platforms like Facebook and Hinge. Using fake names such as Nazir Griffiths and Nazir Luckett, he posted photos and videos of himself in medical uniforms, and even created a fabricated LinkedIn profile claiming he worked at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. These false identities were carefully crafted to earn the trust of unsuspecting women. Once he gained their trust and began relationships, Brightman's behavior turned disturbing. If a partner tried to end things, he allegedly became threatening and violent. In one case, from July 2022, he reportedly forced a woman and her child to return to his home while threatening them with a knife. In August 2023, another woman was allegedly held at knife point in her own apartment. A month later, a third woman in the Bronx said he attacked her and attempted to prevent her from escaping. In a separate incident, a woman told investigators he attempted to assault her, but she was able to escape with the help of a friend. Brightman was eventually arrested and charged with multiple federal offenses, including kidnapping, cyberstalking, and interstate travel to commit domestic violence. In April 2025, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison with an additional 3 years of supervised release. Acting U.S. Attorney Matthew Podolsky praised the courage of the victims who came forward and said Brightman's sentence ensures he can no longer harm others. This case is a chilling reminder of the potential dangers of online dating. No matter how polished someone's profile seems, it's essential to trust your instincts and take safety precautions when meeting new people. Always meet in public places. Inform someone you trust about your plans, and don't ignore red flags.
I could tell that she liked me, and it'd be easy to trick her. I was like, all right, you're too strong.
If you were to do this over again, what have you learned? What would you do different?
I'd get a sharper knife.
But Brightman wasn't the only predator using dating apps as a mask. Hundreds of miles away, in the quiet hills of Utah, a different kind of evil was taking shape. One much younger and just as cold-blooded. On a quiet spring day in Utah, what began as a seemingly innocent online connection turned into a horrifying ordeal that would leave two women fighting for their lives and reveal the dark intentions of an 18-year-old with a violent plan. In early 2022, 18-year-old Kane Fairbank matched with a young woman named Hadley Monroe on Tinder. Like many people her age, Hadley was excited about a new connection. They chatted for hours, exchanged messages and phone calls, and eventually decided to meet in person. By their second date on May 12, Hadley had even met Fairbank's family. It all felt safe, normal. That evening, Fairbank invited her to Mueller Park in Bountiful, Utah, a peaceful, scenic location. Hadley thought they were just going for a picnic, but Fairbank had other plans. According to his later confession to police, he had been planning to harm her since their first conversation. He admitted that he chose her because she trusted him, and that it would be, in his words, easy to trick her. After spending the day together, Hadley got into his car again. The next thing she remembered was waking up to him above her, holding a knife to her throat. Inside the vehicle, Fairbank began attacking her. She was injured on her hands, face, and neck, but she refused to give up. In her effort to defend herself, she even grabbed the blade, trying to stop him. He later told detectives that her blood made the knife too slippery to grip, and that the more she fought, the less fun it was. Eventually, he let her out of the car. Hadley ran, desperately, toward a group of nearby campers. That's when she realized he was chasing her and trying to attack again. Miraculously, the group she ran to included trained medical professionals, nurses, and an EMT who immediately stepped in to help. Fairbank, still armed, stood there covered in blood, staring in rage. Hadley survived, but she sustained serious injuries, including permanent nerve and tendon damage to her hand. She later got a tattoo of a hand gripping a knife, a symbol of her strength and survival. After fleeing the park, Fairbank drove to a nearby gas station, abandoned his car, and approached a 64-year-old woman, someone he'd never met. Without provocation, he attacked her as well. Thankfully, witnesses nearby were able to stop the assault. A Good Samaritan held Fairbank until police arrived. Both victims were hospitalized and ultimately survived. During interrogation, Fairbank admitted he had planned to kill Hadley and said he intended to harm others. When asked if he would have done anything differently, he chillingly replied, "I'd get a sharper knife." In June, Kane Fairbank was sentenced to 18 years to life for 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder. The prosecutor described him as a serial killer in the making. Today, Hadley Monroe continues to heal, physically and emotionally. She's now an advocate for online dating safety and speaks out to protect others. In a way, I'm happy it was me, she told KSL-TV. Because according to him, me fighting back deterred him. Kane Fairbank's case is a grim reminder that not everyone online is who they seem to be, and sometimes the consequences are life-altering. To the survivors, your strength has saved lives. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, and remember, no message, no match, and no meetup is ever worth putting yourself at risk. Always meet in public, trust your instincts, and let someone know where you're going.